When a real blizzard hits, everything else stops. Schools close, flights are grounded, the highways fill up with stranded cars, and everybody is told to stay home. And out in the middle of all that white chaos, the one thing that is very often still moving is a freight train. While the whole country shuts down, the railroad keeps rolling, hauling grain and coal in containers straight through the worst of it. For the railroads, a blizzard is not a snow day, it is just a Tuesday. They plan for it all year long. But how? How does a train keep running through snow deep enough to bury a car, in cold that snaps steel, on a night when nothing else in the country dares to move? And what happens when even the railroad, with all its planning, finally loses the fight? Because sometimes it does, and when it does, the story turns into something out of a nightmare. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We want to know who's out there. Start with the enemy, because snow is a far bigger problem for a railroad than it looks. You would think a heavy train would just plow through it, and for a light dusting it does. Most diesel locomotives have a plow built right into the front called the pilot, and shoving aside a foot or two of snow is easy work. The real trouble is not the open track. It is one small moving part that the whole railroad depends on: the switch. A switch is the movable section of rail that lets a train change from one track to another. It has to physically slide back and forth to work, and that means it has a gap, a moving joint, right out in the open. When snow blows into that gap and packs down or melts and refreezes into solid ice, the switch jams. It cannot move. And a switch that cannot move is a train that cannot change tracks, which can freeze an entire section of railroad solid. Worse, the snow does not even have to fall to cause it. Wind picks up loose snow off the ground and packs it into the switches hours after the storm, and passing trains drag snow off their own cars and drop it right into the points. One frozen switch and the network starts to seize. So the railroads fight the switches first. Almost every important switch on a snowy network has a heater built into it. Some blow hot air, some are electric elements like the coils in a toaster, some burn gas, and many are watched remotely so a dispatcher gets a warning the moment one starts to freeze. But when the heaters are not enough, it comes down to what it always came down to. Men with brooms, shovels, and ice picks out in the storm at 3 in the morning, digging a single switch out by hand so the trains can keep moving. Ask anyone who has done it, and they will tell you it is an experience you do not forget and do not want to repeat. Then there is the heavy artillery, for when the snow is simply too deep for a locomotive's plow. This is where the railroad brings out one of the most spectacular machines it owns: the rotary snowplough. Picture a giant spinning steel fan, 11 feet across, mounted on the front of a machine that can weigh over 150 tons. It does not push the snow. It chews straight into a drift, grinds it up, and hurls it in a great arc clean off to the side of the track. A rotary plow can carve through snow taller than the train itself, throwing it 100 feet away. When you see one working, it looks less like snow clearing and more like a machine eating a mountain. And the modern railroads have added new weapons to the old ones. Union Pacific runs a fleet of jet-powered snowblowers, machines that literally use jet engine exhaust to blast snow and ice off the switches and rails. They have what they nickname snow buses, which are locomotives running with no freight at all, sent up and down the line every 2 or 3 hours through the night with the single job of keeping the rails packed open so they never get a chance to drift shut. They keep old cabooses stuffed with winter gear and supplies, parked at key points as shelter and storerooms for the crews. Behind all of it sits a weather command center staffed around the clock, watching the storm and rerouting trains away from the worst of it before they ever get there. So that is how a train keeps moving through a blizzard. Plows on the front, heaters in the switches, rotaries eating the drifts, jet blowers, snow buses, and an army of people out in the dark. Most of the time, it works. The freight gets through when nothing else can, but not always. And this is where you find out what really happens when a train loses. In January of 1952, a passenger streamliner called the City of San Francisco set out over Donner Pass, high in California's Sierra Nevada, in the middle of a monstrous storm. Winds gusted to 100 miles an hour. Snow was already piled 17 feet deep on the ground. The train plunged through one snowslide at speed and then hit a second one it never saw coming and stopped dead, its locomotives half buried in drifts 12 feet high. 226 passengers and crew were trapped on that train in the mountains in a blizzard. And here is the part that shows you how badly nature can beat the machine. Southern Pacific sent its best. Rotary snowplows, the giant fan machines, came grinding up the mountain from both directions to break the train free. One derailed just car length short of reaching it. Then an avalanche came down the slope and struck one of the rotaries head-on, flipping it over and burying the engineer, a man named Roland Raymond, killing him under his own machine. Before it was over, 5 rotary plows were either buried or broken down. The most powerful snow fighting equipment on Earth defeated. On the train, it fell apart slowly. The first day, spirits were high. They had heat, food, light. They played cards and joked that they would be there a week. Then the line feeding water to the locomotive boiler froze and the heat died. The lights went out. The pipes froze and the toilets backed up. Blowing snow climbed up over the windows until the passengers could not see out at all, sealed inside a dark, freezing metal tube. Food was rationed. For 3 days they sat there, cold and frightened and forgotten, while the storm outside killed the machines sent to save them. In the end, no machine freed them. It was people. A doctor and nurses who happened to be passengers kept the sick alive. Local volunteers and Sierra Club skiers hauled canned food through the drifts on foot and by snowcat. A power company worker died of a heart attack fighting through the snow to bring the train supplies. On the 3rd day, they finally walked the passengers off the dead train through a canyon of ice to safety. So that is what happens to a train in a snowstorm. Almost always, it wins. It is the toughest thing moving in the whole frozen country, backed by heaters and rotaries and jet engines and an army that does not get a snow day. But every so often, the mountain reminds everyone who is actually in charge, and a machine that can chew through a drift taller than a house ends up buried in it, while the people inside learn the oldest lesson the railroad ever taught. Out here, in the deep cold, the snow always gets the last word.